Peacock screamed at one window. Then they checked the attic. The first scream came at 6:03 in the morning, just as the sun began to rise over the old orchard behind Rosewell Manor. It tore through the quiet house like something alive being split open, sharp enough to make Eleanor Price drop the kettle lid into the sink and grab the counter with both hands. For one breathless second, she thought someone was outside the kitchen door. Then the sound came again, longer this time, wild and metallic, echoing through the damp spring air. Ah! Ow! Eleanor closed her eyes. Not a person, a peacock. She stood in the kitchen of the manor house, barefoot on cracked tile, listening as the bird screamed again somewhere beyond the east wall. The house had belonged to her family for 3 generations, though calling it a manor now felt generous. Rosewell was beautiful in the way old houses are beautiful when they are falling apart. Ivy on the stone, warped floorboards, tall windows, sagging gutters, and ceilings that seemed to sigh whenever it rained. After her father died, Eleanor had inherited the property along with unpaid bills, a leaking roof, and more memories than she knew what to do with. She had come back to sell it. That was what she told everyone. Her younger brother, Mark, wanted the sale done quickly. He lived in London, had a wife, 2 children, a mortgage, and no patience for sentiment. Eleanor understood him. Rosewell was too large, too expensive, and too full of grief. Their mother had died years earlier. Their father, Arthur Price, had spent his final months in the downstairs bedroom overlooking the orchard, refusing to leave the house even when the doctor said the stairs were no longer safe for him. Eleanor had cared for him there until the end. Now she was alone in the house, packing rooms into boxes, or trying to. The peacock screamed again. Eleanor opened the back door and stepped into the chilly morning. Mist lay low over the orchard grass. The old fountain in the courtyard was empty except for rainwater and leaves. Beyond the stone path, near the side of the house, stood a male peacock in full, impossible color. His long train dragged behind him, wet at the tips. His neck shone deep blue, bright even in the gray light, and a little crown of feathers trembled on his head. He stood beneath the east wing, staring up at a narrow window near the roof. Then he screamed. Eleanor wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. "Percival, it is far too early." Percival was not technically her peacock. He had simply appeared on the property 6 years earlier and never left. Her father claimed the bird had escaped from a private estate miles away. The estate denied ownership. The village council refused to get involved, so Percival became part of Rosewell Manor, wandering the orchard, terrorizing delivery drivers, stealing berries, and screaming whenever he believed the world had failed to admire him properly. Her father had adored him. Eleanor had tolerated him. "Come down from there," she called, though the bird was not up anywhere, or at least scream at a more reasonable hour. Percival did not even glance at her. He kept staring at the same upper window. It belonged to the attic. Eleanor followed his gaze and frowned. The east attic window was small and arched, set under the eaves where the roof met the old nursery wing. She had not been up there since returning. The attic held old trunks, broken furniture, Christmas decorations, her mother's paintings, and whatever else generations of Prices had decided not to throw away. The stairs were narrow and the light switch barely worked. Eleanor had been avoiding it. Percival screamed again, not at her, at the window. She walked closer, standing below the bird, and looked up. Nothing moved behind the glass. The window was dusty, opaque with age and cobwebs. A crack ran through one corner. The frame looked swollen from damp. "Is there a nest up there?" she muttered. Percival lowered his head and gave a harsh, rattling call. Then he pecked hard at the stone wall beneath the window. Eleanor sighed. "If you've trapped yourself emotionally in an argument with your reflection, I cannot help you." The bird ignored her. She went back inside and tried to make tea. For the next hour, Percival screamed at the attic window every 7 minutes. Eleanor counted. At 7:18, Mark called. "Please tell me you've called the estate agent," he said without saying hello. "Good morning to you, too." "Ellie." I'm packing. You said that last week. I packed 3 boxes yesterday. Of what? She glanced toward the dining table where one box was full of old letters, another of cracked teacups, and the third of things she had removed from shelves and then put back. Important things, Mark sighed. We can't keep dragging this out. The roof survey alone is going to terrify buyers. As if on cue, Percival screamed outside. Mark went silent. Was that the Peacock? Yes. Is he still there? He's always still here. Can you make sure the new owners know he doesn't come with the house? I'm not sure Percival accepts property law. The Peacock screamed again. Mark groaned. How did Dad live with that? He said it kept thieves away. It kept everyone away. Eleanor looked out the window. Percival had not moved. He stood beneath the east wing, eyes fixed upward. He's acting strange, she said. He is a peacock. Stranger than usual. That is a high bar. She told him about the window. Mark was quiet for a second. Maybe there's a squirrel in the attic. Maybe. Call someone if you need to. Don't climb around that place alone. I am perfectly capable of checking an attic. Eleanor. I changed Dad's oxygen tanks and argued with the council about drainage while you were hiding in London. I can manage a staircase. That's not fair. She closed her eyes. He was right. It was not fair. But grief had made fairness hard to hold. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Mark softened. I know. Percival screamed again. Mark exhaled. Check the attic if you must, but be careful. I will. She ended the call and stood in the kitchen, listening. The house felt awake now. Pipes creaked. Wind moved under doors. Somewhere in the walls an old radiator clicked, though the heating was off. Percival cried again, and this time the sound made the hair on Eleanor's arms rise. Not because it was loud, because something answered. It was faint, so faint she almost missed it. A tiny sound from above, a scratch, then silence. Eleanor stood completely still. Percival screamed again outside. From somewhere in the ceiling there came another sound, a soft thud. Her mouth went dry. She grabbed a flashlight from the utility drawer and started toward the back stairs. The attic entrance was at the end of the upper hallway, beyond the rooms that had once been the nursery. Eleanor passed covered furniture, family portraits, peeling wallpaper, and the closed door of the room where she and Mark had slept as children during summer visits. The house seemed colder on that side. The air smelled of dust and damp wood. At the attic door she paused. Percival screamed outside, muffled by stone and glass. Eleanor switched on the flashlight. The door stuck when she pushed it. She pushed harder. It opened with a groan. The attic stairs climbed steeply into darkness. Hello? She called, feeling foolish and frightened at once. No answer. She climbed slowly, one hand on the wall, the flashlight beam shaking slightly. Dust floated in the light. At the top, the attic opened into a long, low space beneath the roof beams. Trunks lined one wall. Old chairs sat beneath sheets. Boxes leaned in uneven stacks. The east window glowed faintly with gray morning light, and beyond it Eleanor could see blurred color moving below. Percival, watching. She swept the flashlight across the floor. Nothing. Then she heard it again. Scratch. From the far corner near the old chimney stack. Eleanor swallowed. Is someone there? A tiny cry answered. Not human. Animal. She moved closer. Behind a stack of old picture frames was a narrow gap where part of the roof lining had warped away from the wall. The scratch came from behind it. Something was trapped inside the cavity between the attic wall and the outer stone. Eleanor crouched. A small paw pushed through the gap. Black. Clawed. Then a little masked face appeared. A raccoon. No, not a raccoon. They did not have raccoons in rural England. She leaned closer. It was a young fox cub, its reddish fur dulled by dust, its dark eyes wide with fear. It had squeezed partly through the gap but was stuck at the shoulders, caught between broken lath and a fallen frame. It panted weakly. "Oh, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered. The cub gave a small whimper. From outside, Percival screamed again. The fox cub jerked in panic. "Easy," Eleanor said. "Easy." She backed away immediately and called the local wildlife rescue center. It took 3 attempts to get a signal strong enough in the attic. When a woman finally answered, Eleanor explained as clearly as she could. Peacock screaming at attic window, strange sounds, fox cub trapped behind wall, old house, possible more animals. The rescuer's name was Bethan Reed. "Do not try to pull the cub out," Bethan said. "There may be injury or structural debris. Is the mother fox nearby?" "I don't know." "Any other sounds?" Eleanor listened. For a moment, only rain tapped the roof. Then, from deeper in the wall cavity, came another tiny cry. Eleanor's breath caught. "There's more than one." Bethan's voice sharpened. "I'm on my way. Keep the room quiet. Keep pets away." "I don't have pets. I have a peacock screaming at the window." "Keep the peacock outside." "That is usually where he prefers to be." Bethan paused. "A peacock alerted you." "I suppose he did." "Then don't ignore anything else he does." Eleanor ended the call and sat on an old trunk watching the trapped cub. The little animal trembled, stuck halfway in shadow. Every now and then it tried to pull back and failed. Eleanor wanted desperately to free it, but Bethan's warning held her still. Percival screamed again. This time the cub did not flinch. Instead, another sound rose from the wall, a chorus of faint cries. Eleanor put a hand over her mouth. There was a den inside the attic wall, and something had gone wrong. Bethan arrived 30 minutes later with 2 volunteers carrying gloves, carriers, towels, a thermal bag, and equipment that looked far too professional for the chaos of Rosewell Manor's back staircase. She was in her 40s, compact and calm, with short dark hair, muddy boots, and the expression of someone who had rescued animals from stranger places than attics. Percival met them in the courtyard. He screamed directly at Bethan. One volunteer stopped. "Is that normal?" Eleanor said. "For him, yes." Bethan looked up at the attic window. Percival stood below it, pacing now, feathers dragging through the wet grass. "He's focused on that corner. That's where the cub is." Bethan nodded. "Interesting." They went upstairs. In the attic, Bethan crouched near the gap and examined the trapped cub without touching it at first. Juvenile, 6, maybe 7 weeks, dehydrated, not badly stuck at first glance, but there's debris behind the shoulders. Another cub cried from inside the wall. Bethan lifted her head. "How long has the peacock been screaming?" "Since dawn." "Foxes are usually active earlier. Something may have happened overnight." "What kind of something?" Bethan looked around the attic. Her flashlight moved over the warped roof lining, damp beams, old chimney stack, and a section of collapsed plaster near the east wall. Possibly part of the nesting space collapsed. The vixen may have been using a gap in the roof to access the attic void. If the cubs fell or got blocked in, she might not be able to reach them. Eleanor felt sick. "Can you save them?" "We'll try." The first cub was freed after Bethan carefully cut away part of the broken lath. It was weaker than it had looked, its little body limp with exhaustion once the pressure released. Bethan wrapped it in a towel and passed it to a volunteer. "One out." The cries inside the wall grew louder. Bethan used a small inspection camera through the gap. Eleanor watched her face as she saw the hidden space. "How many?" Eleanor asked. Bethan did not answer immediately. Then she said, "At least 3 more, maybe 4, and one is down lower near the floor cavity." The rescue became slow, careful work. They could not simply tear open the wall. The attic structure was old and fragile. Pulling the wrong board could injure the cubs or damage the roof. Bethan marked where each cub appeared on the camera. The volunteers laid towels and carriers nearby. Eleanor hovered until Bethan gave her a job. Hold the flashlight steady and stop apologizing for the house. "I don't know how they got in." Eleanor said. Old houses are full of invitations, Bethan replied. Animals find them before people do. Another cub came out, then a third, both alive, cold, dusty, hungry. The fourth was wedged beneath a collapsed piece of plasterboard. It took 20 minutes to free. The fifth was the problem. It had slipped downward between the attic wall and a lower ceiling cavity, perhaps above the old nursery room. The inspection camera showed only a twitching ear and one tiny paw. It was alive, but trapped in a narrow vertical space. If it fell farther, it could drop into the wall void and become unreachable. Bethan sat back on her heels. We need access from below. Eleanor knew immediately what that meant. The nursery. They went downstairs to the room she had not opened since returning. The door handle felt cold in her hand. For a moment, she could not turn it. Mark's voice from the morning returned to her. Don't climb around that place alone. Be careful. Her father's voice followed. Rosewell keeps everything, Ellie. That's the trouble with old houses. Eleanor opened the door. The nursery smelled of dust, old curtains, and memory. 2 small iron beds stood against opposite walls, covered in sheets. A faded mural of birds and trees, painted by her mother years ago, still ran along the lower wall. On a shelf sat wooden blocks, a cracked music box, and a porcelain rabbit with one ear missing. Eleanor had slept in this room as a child. Mark had thrown a shoe at her from the other bed one summer night and broken the rabbit's ear. Their mother had laughed until she cried. Eleanor had not remembered that in years. Then a tiny cry came from the ceiling. Bethan looked up. There. The sound came from above the window alcove, near a section of cracked plaster. Outside, Percival screamed again. Eleanor looked through the nursery window. The Peacock had moved. He was now standing directly below this window, staring up. Bethan followed her gaze. Well, she said softly, he's tracking the sound. Eleanor stared at the bird. He knew. Animals notice things we miss. Bethan carefully tapped the plaster, hollow, fragile. She asked Eleanor for permission before cutting into it. Eleanor nodded. It was only plaster, only a wall, only a house she claimed she wanted to sell. Bethan made a small opening. Dust fell. A faint squeak came from inside. One volunteer reached in with gloved hands and after several tense seconds drew out the final fox cub. It was smaller than the others, cold, barely moving. Eleanor's chest tightened. Is it alive? Bethan held it against the towel and felt carefully. Yes, she said, but weak. Eleanor turned away and pressed both hands over her mouth. Through the window, Percival gave one loud cry. Then for the first time all morning, he went silent. The cubs were taken downstairs to a warm, quiet room while Bethan checked them. 5 in total, dehydrated, underfed, dust in their eyes and noses, scrapes from debris, but alive. The next question was the mother. Fox cubs that age needed care. If the vixen was alive and nearby, the best outcome would be reunion. But if the mother was dead, injured, or had abandoned the den after the collapse, the cubs would need rehabilitation. Bethan searched the exterior of the house and found the likely entrance, a broken roof vent near the east eaves hidden behind ivy. Paw marks and fur caught on the edge showed a fox had been using it. Below the wall near the orchard were tracks in mud, adult fox tracks, recent. She's been coming and going, Bethan said. Then where is she? Bethan scanned the orchard. Percival stood near the old fountain now, strangely quiet, head turned toward the far hedge. Eleanor noticed. Percival? The Peacock began walking toward the orchard, not strutting, not wandering, walking with purpose. Bethan's eyes narrowed. Let's follow. They moved through wet grass beneath apple trees. The orchard had been neglected for years, branches tangled, windfall fruit rotting under leaves. Percival moved ahead of them, then stopped near an old stone drainage culvert half covered in ivy. He screamed once. From inside the culvert came a weak bark. Bethan immediately crouched. A fox was trapped inside. The vixen was thin, mud-streaked, and caught by her hind leg in a rusted loop of wire tangled in the culvert grating. She must have crawled in after leaving the attic den and become trapped overnight, unable to return to her cubs. The more she struggled, the tighter the wire pulled. Eleanor felt anger rise so fast she almost shook. Who left that there? Old fencing wire, Bethan said grimly. Could have washed down years ago. It doesn't take much. The vixen bared her teeth weakly when Bethan approached, but she was exhausted. Freeing her took patience, towels, gloves, and wire cutters. Percival stood nearby, watching with unnerving intensity. Once the wire was cut, the fox tried to stand and collapsed. She's injured, Bethan said. Not broken, I think, but swollen and cut. She needs treatment. What about the cubs? We'll take the whole family in for now. If she stabilizes and accepts them, we keep them together. Eleanor looked at Percival. The peacock shook rain from his feathers and pecked at the grass as if none of this had anything to do with him. You irritating miracle, she whispered. By afternoon, Rosewell Manor was full of people. Wildlife volunteers carried equipment through halls that had not seen this much activity in years. Bethan set up transport carriers. A local builder was called to inspect the attic wall and roof vent to make sure no more animals were trapped. Mark arrived from London after Eleanor called him with the sentence, "The peacock found foxes in the attic and a trapped mother in the drain," which led to a long silence and then, "I'm coming." He arrived just as Bethan was loading the vixen into a carrier. Mark stood in the courtyard looking from the rescuers to the peacock to his sister. "I don't even know where to begin." Eleanor gave a tired laugh. "Neither do I." Percival screamed at him. Mark flinched. "I see he remembers me." The Fox family was transported to the Wildlife Center. Bethan called that evening with an update. The vixen had accepted all 5 cubs after treatment. The smallest was still weak but had nursed. The mother's leg wound was serious but not life-threatening. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the phone pressed to her ear, tears running down her face. Mark sat across from her, silent. After she hung up, he said, "You're crying over foxes." "Yes." He looked toward the dark window where Percival's silhouette stood somewhere in the courtyard. Dad would have loved this. Eleanor laughed and cried harder. He would have given Percival a medal. He would have made us all attend a ceremony. With biscuits. Bad biscuits. They both laughed then, unexpectedly, shakily. It was the first time since their father's funeral that they had laughed together without guilt rushing in to stop it. The next morning, Eleanor found one of Arthur's old notebooks in the library. She had been sorting shelves when it slipped from between 2 gardening books. Inside were notes in her father's handwriting, weather observations, repairs needed, bird sightings, sketches of orchard trees. Near the back, she found a page titled Percival. She smiled despite herself. Her father had written, "Percival screamed at the east wing again today, found a loose slate. Last month he screamed at the greenhouse, found a hedgehog trapped in netting. He is unbearable, vain, aggressive toward the postman, and possibly the most observant creature on the property." Eleanor sat down slowly. Below that, another line. "If he screams at one thing long enough, check it." She covered her mouth. Her father had known. Not that foxes would be in the attic, not exactly, but he had learned to listen to the bird. Eleanor had dismissed him as noise. Arthur had heard warning. Mark read the notebook later and grew quiet. "He wrote about everything," he said. "Yes." "He didn't tell us half of it." "He tried," Eleanor said. "Maybe we weren't listening." Mark looked around the library, at the boxes, the faded rugs, the shelves their father had dusted until the month before he died. "The buyer wants another viewing next week," he said. Eleanor looked down. "I know." Mark closed the notebook. "We don't have to decide today." She looked up. "You said we did." "I was wrong." The words hung there, startling and gentle. Rosewell began changing after that, not dramatically, not all at once. The roof still leaked. The east attic wall needed repair. The orchard was overgrown. Bills still existed, and grief did not vanish because fox cubs survived in a wildlife center. But the house no longer felt like a mausoleum Eleanor had to escape. It felt once again like a place where life was happening in hidden corners. Messy life, wildlife, life that screamed at windows until someone paid attention. Bethan invited Eleanor and Mark to visit the Wildlife Center 2 weeks later. They could not handle the foxes, of course, but they stood behind a viewing screen while the vixen rested in a recovery enclosure with her cubs piled against her belly. The smallest cub, still fragile but stronger now, pushed its way over two siblings and yawned. Mark whispered, "That one looks like you." Eleanor whispered, "Tiny and furious?" "Exactly." Bethan explained the plan. The vixen would remain until her leg healed enough for release. The cubs would grow in a controlled enclosure with minimal human contact. If possible, the family would be released near Rosewell's orchard, where the mother had territory, but only after the attic entry was sealed and the dangerous wire removed. Eleanor nodded. "They can come back." Mark looked at her. She noticed. "What? You said that like you're staying." She turned back to the foxes. "I don't know what I'm doing." "That's more honest than selling because we're scared." Eleanor looked at him sharply. Mark shrugged. "I can be emotionally intelligent once a year." She smiled. The foxes were released in late summer. By then, Rosewell had changed even more. The attic had been repaired, but a wildlife-friendly den box had been installed at the edge of the orchard under Bethan's guidance. The old culvert had been cleared of wire and fitted with a safer grate. The orchard grass was left longer in some areas for wildlife, with clear paths cut through. Percival continued screaming at anyone who entered his territory, but Eleanor had learned to distinguish his ordinary arrogance from his alarm. There was, to her surprise, a difference. The release happened at dusk. Eleanor, Mark, Bethan, and two volunteers stood quietly near the orchard wall. Percival perched on the low stone fountain, feathers trailing, watching like an overdramatic judge. Bethan opened the carrier. The vixen emerged first. Her leg was healed, though she moved cautiously at first. She sniffed the air, ears forward. One by one, the cubs slipped out behind her, no longer helpless bundles but lean young foxes with bright eyes and restless paws. The smallest came last, still a little smaller, still alive. Percival let out a scream. All 6 foxes froze. Eleanor closed her eyes. Percival. The vixen stared at the peacock. The peacock stared back. For 1/10 second, it seemed possible the release would become a cross-species argument. Then the vixen turned and slipped into the orchard shadows. The cubs followed. The smallest paused near the grass, glanced back once, then vanished. Eleanor felt Mark's hand on her shoulder. "They're gone," he said softly. "Yes." "You okay?" She wiped her eyes. "Yes." And for once she meant it. Rosewell was not sold that year. Instead, Eleanor and Mark made a plan. Part of the house would be restored slowly, part would be rented for small events. The orchard would become a protected wildlife garden open during village charity days. Bethan's rescue center would use one of the outbuildings for seasonal storage and education workshops. Mark helped with finances. Eleanor stayed on to manage the place, though she still called him whenever a pipe made a suspicious noise. The first workshop was called Living with Wildlife in Old Buildings. Percival interrupted it 4 times. Bethan told attendees this was immersive learning. The story spread through the village. The peacock who screamed at one window until the owners checked the attic. The fox cubs trapped in the walls. The mother fox caught in the drain. The old notebook where Arthur Price had written that Percival should be listened to. People laughed at first, then began paying attention to their own houses, sheds, nets, wires, and strange animal noises. A neighbor found swallows trapped in a chimney. Another found a hedgehog tangled in old garden mesh. The school asked Eleanor to speak about Rosewell's wildlife project. She almost refused, then went with Percival's photograph and her father's notebook. Standing before a room full of children, she told them, Not every noise is just noise. Sometimes an animal is telling you something is wrong. You don't have to understand immediately. You just have to care enough to check. A child raised his hand. Did the peacock know there were foxes? Eleanor smiled. I don't know what he knew, but he heard what we didn't. Another child asked, Is he nice? Eleanor considered lying. No, she said, but he is important. Years passed. Rosewell became less of a ruin and more of a refuge, not polished, not perfect. Still damp in places, still expensive, still filled with rooms that surprised people with loose handles and uneven floors, but alive. The orchard bloomed again. Foxes were seen at dusk along the far wall, never close enough to be tame, just present. Eleanor never knew for certain whether the vixen and her cubs returned, but once, late one evening, she saw a small fox with a faint pale mark on one ear slip beneath the apple trees. Percival lived like a king and behaved like a tyrant. He chased delivery vans. He admired himself in the greenhouse glass. He screamed during Mark's daughter's birthday party and made 3 children cry. He also saved over the years one trapped crow, a hedgehog stuck in a drain cover, and a barn owl that had fallen into the old stable loft. Eleanor learned her father's lesson well. If Percival screamed at the same place more than twice, someone checked. On the 5th anniversary of the fox rescue, Eleanor found herself standing beneath the east attic window at dawn. The stone wall had been repaired, the roof vent sealed properly. The nursery below had become a quiet reading room for visiting children, with her mother's mural restored and the cracked porcelain rabbit still on the shelf, one ear missing. Percival stood beside her. Older now, his train shorter, his colors still brilliant. He looked up at the window. For a moment, Eleanor's heart tightened. "Don't you dare," she said. Percival blinked. Then he turned, walked to the lawn, and began pecking at the grass. No scream, no warning, only morning. Eleanor smiled. "Good," she whispered. Mark arrived later that day with his family. He found Eleanor in the orchard, trimming roses near the path. "You know," he said, "the buyer from years ago wrote again." Eleanor straightened. Mark held up both hands. "I said we weren't interested," she laughed. "You didn't even ask me." "I didn't need to." They looked toward the house. Rosewell stood in the sunlight, old and stubborn, full of repaired cracks and hidden stories. From near the fountain, Percival screamed at absolutely nothing. Mark winced. "Are we sure?" Eleanor smiled. Yes, and she was. So before we go, remember this. Sometimes the warning does not come gently. Sometimes it screams at dawn beneath an attic window until everyone in the house wants to throw a pillow at it. Percival the peacock was loud, vain, impossible, and deeply inconvenient, but he heard the fox cubs trapped in the wall when no one else did. He led them to the attic, then to the mother fox caught in the drain, and in doing so he saved an entire family hidden inside an old house. He could not explain, he could not point, he could only scream at the same window until someone finally checked, and when they did, they found more than foxes. They found a reason to listen. They found a way back into the life of the house. And Eleanor learned that sometimes the home you are trying to leave still has something important to tell you,